In a moment that has sent shockwaves through the United Kingdom, King Charles III has declared Catherine, Princess of Wales, the Monarch of Scotland. The announcement, delivered during a rare full session of the Scottish Parliament, marks what royal aides describe as the most significant royal realignment in a generation. The world is watching, and tonight we're unpacking every layer of this extraordinary move, the timing, the symbolism, and the silent tension rippling through Buckingham Palace. This wasn't a royal engagement, it was a statement. At precisely 11:42 a.m., King Charles, dressed in a dark green tartan kilt, rose before the assembled ministers in Edinburgh's Holyrood chamber. Cameras flashed, the room hushed. And then came the words that would alter the monarchy's balance forever. The title of Duke of Rothesay, and the Scottish honours I have long carried with pride, I now bestow upon Catherine, Princess of Wales, the Monarch of Scotland. Gasps, applause, disbelief. Within minutes, social media went into meltdown. Catherine of Scotland began trending worldwide, while Scottish news outlets broke into rolling coverage. What had been billed as a routine royal visit had turned into a constitutional earthquake. According to palace insiders, the decision was months in the making, tightly guarded under the codename Operation Alba. Only a handful of people, King Charles, Prince William, and one senior Balmoral advisor, were aware of its true intent. It was Charles's personal project, a former courtier told us. He wanted to do something no monarch had dared since Queen Victoria, give Scotland a royal symbol it could truly call its own. But why now? Analysts believe the timing is no coincidence. With support for Scottish independence climbing again after years of political gridlock, Charles's move is seen as a bold attempt to reinforce unity through symbolism. And who better to embody that bridge than Catherine, the most popular royal of her generation, whose every public appearance turns into a headline. Sources close to the king describe the announcement as his heart over his head. Scotland, long a place of retreat and reflection for the monarch, has become the testing ground for his vision of a regional monarchy. A senior aide put it bluntly, "If the monarchy is to survive another century, it must evolve, and Catherine is evolution." And still, the implications are staggering. The title, Monarch of Scotland, carries deep historical resonance. Though ceremonial, it evokes centuries of turbulent sovereignty, from Robert the Bruce to Mary, Queen of Scots. By assigning it to Catherine, Charles has effectively rewritten a piece of royal protocol that had remained untouched since the 1707 Act of Union. Political reaction in Edinburgh was swift. The First Minister called it a gesture of trust, while one opposition MP labelled it a charm offensive disguised as constitutional reform. Yet outside the chamber, the mood was electric. Crowds gathered along the Royal Mile, waving the Saltire and Union Jack side by side, a rare sight in these divided times. "She's one of us," a local teacher shouted as Catherine emerged from Holyrood House, her expression serene, eyes glistening with emotion. Behind that poise, however, lies months of intense preparation. Palace aides reveal Catherine spent the past year studying Scottish history, working privately with scholars from St Andrews, the same university where she first met William 2 decades ago. She wanted to understand not just the politics, but the pulse of the people, one aide confided. She knew this role would be different, something that would define her legacy. The announcement itself was choreographed with military precision. Catherine seated beside Prince William, both dressed in subdued Highland attire. The king's speech blending reverence with reform. No music, no procession, just words, deliberately chosen to echo through history. Royal photographers described the moment as chilling in its simplicity. Public reaction has been overwhelming. Polls taken within hours show 78% of Scots approve of the appointment, a level of support unseen since the days of Queen Elizabeth II. Commentators call it a masterstroke of soft power. The Edinburgh Post described Catherine as a monarch of the people, not above them. Even some independence advocates, long skeptical of royal symbolism, admit her authenticity has softened public sentiment. Still, not everyone inside the palace is celebrating. Behind closed doors, murmurs of unease are growing. A senior source within Clarence's house hinted that some traditionalists are unsettled by the creation of a second, semi-autonomous monarch. Another went further, describing a quiet but palpable tension between London and Edinburgh. It's a power shift cloaked in ceremony, but make no mistake, it's power nonetheless. Catherine's new position grants her ceremonial authority over Scottish affairs, from opening Parliament sessions to representing Scotland at Commonwealth events. It's symbolic, one royal watcher told us, but in the monarchy, symbols are everything. Tonight, the question hanging over Westminster isn't just what Catherine's coronation in Scotland means for the Union, but what it means for the balance inside the royal family itself. King Charles has handed her a crown, albeit symbolic, and some are already whispering, has he also handed her the future? As the cameras fade and Edinburgh returns to calm, one thing is clear, the monarchy will never be the same again. But this story is only beginning. Because while the king may have made his move, not everyone inside the palace agrees with the game he's playing. Hours after the announcement, the tremors from Edinburgh could still be felt all the way down to London. Royal correspondents described the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace as stunned silence mixed with polite confusion. Even seasoned courtiers admitted they had no idea the king was planning such a sweeping gesture. One senior aide, speaking under condition of anonymity, summed it up. "We were briefed about a speech on unity, not a coronation. Yet to those who have followed King Charles's long and often restless reign, the signs were there." Insiders say he had grown increasingly concerned about Scotland's distance from Westminster, politically, culturally, emotionally. He wanted to reforge the bond in a way that spoke to modern Scots, said historian Alan MacDonald. And he knew Catherine, with her history in St Andrews and her unblemished image, was the one figure capable of transcending politics. That idea, that Catherine could heal where politicians had divided, is now being tested in real time. Her face dominated front pages from Glasgow to Sydney. The Daily Telegraph declared, "A new queen in the north," while The Guardian simply called it the gamble. On social media, the mood was euphoric. Clips of Catherine smiling shyly during the ceremony racked up millions of views within hours. But beneath the praise, questions were forming. Was this the dawn of a modern monarchy, or the start of another royal storm? Because behind the smooth delivery of Charles's speech lies a web of calculated risk. Constitutional experts note that the title Monarch of Scotland blurs the line between symbolic unity and political overreach. "It's a masterclass in ambiguity," said constitutional scholar Dr. Fiona Lennox. Technically, the UK still has one monarch, but emotionally, culturally, Charles has just split the crown in two. The boldness of the move has already divided royal insiders. Some hail it as visionary, the natural evolution of a monarchy adapting to a multinational kingdom. Others see it as reckless, an emotional reaction from a king eager to secure his legacy while facing the reality of age and waning influence. Charles is thinking about history, one court insider told us. But history doesn't always go the way kings expect. Meanwhile, Catherine herself appears determined to set the tone of humility. Her brief remarks after the ceremony were simple, unadorned, and deeply personal. "Scotland has shaped who I am. I will carry this honour not as a crown, but as a calling." Those words, delivered with quiet conviction, drew spontaneous applause from the crowd outside Holyrood. Within hours, banners appeared across Edinburgh bearing her quote in Gaelic. For many Scots, the connection is genuine. Catherine's story, the student from Berkshire who found love and purpose in Scotland, feels like something out of national folklore. Locals in St Andrews still recall her kindness, her easy laughter in cafes, her willingness to blend in. She never acted royal here, said one former university staff member. She was just Kate, and that's why people believe her now. The king's vision, according to palace aides, was to harness exactly that sentiment. Charles has long admired Scotland's fierce sense of identity, often calling it the soul of the kingdom. By giving Catherine this title, he hoped to bind the monarchy to that soul, to show that the crown can reflect the diversity of the union rather than dominate it. But not everyone is convinced. In Westminster, murmurs of unease have begun to echo through political circles. Some MPs privately worry the move could fuel nationalist arguments rather than suppress them. If Scotland has its own monarch, even symbolically, one Labour backbencher warned, it makes separation feel that much closer. And then there's the other palace, the one in London. Reports suggest Queen Camilla was informed of the decision only days before the announcement. Though official statements insist, Her Majesty fully supports the King's vision, insiders whisper of tension. It's not jealousy, said one royal correspondent. It's about hierarchy. Camilla is the Queen consort, yet in the eyes of millions, Catherine just became the Queen of Hearts again, this time north of the border. Within the royal household, fault lines are forming. Advisers loyal to Clarence House describe Catherine's appointment as a regional honour. Those aligned with Kensington Palace call it the start of a new model of monarchy. Between the two perspectives lies an unspoken truth. Catherine's popularity now eclipses every other royal except the late Queen herself. As night falls over Edinburgh, the mood remains electric. Crowds still gather outside Holyrood, lighting candles and waving flags, while shop windows display photos of Catherine crowned with thistles and heather. For Scotland, it feels like a moment of renewal. For the monarchy, it feels like a turning point. But inside the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, a different energy lingers, one of uncertainty, perhaps even unease. Because if Catherine is now the monarch of Scotland, what does that make everyone else? And in a family built on centuries of hierarchy, who decides where the next crown truly belongs? By dawn the following morning, the grandeur of Holyrood had faded into quiet disbelief inside Buckingham Palace. What began as a symbolic act in Edinburgh was now unfolding as a full-blown power story in London. Palace corridors that once hummed with routine had turned tense, hushed. Staff avoided eye contact. The question hung heavy in the air. Had the king gone too far? Within hours of the ceremony, Camilla's private office reportedly called an emergency meeting. One insider described it as a storm behind closed doors. According to those familiar with palace operations, the Queen Consort had not been fully briefed on the details of Catherine's title. She knew something was coming, said a senior royal aide. But not this. Not a title that carried the word monarch. Officially, there was no rift. Statements from the palace were careful, almost clinical. Her Majesty, the Queen Consort, and the Prince and Princess of Wales continue to work closely with His Majesty, the King, in service of all nations of the United Kingdom. But behind the velvet curtains, insiders say the tone was anything but harmonious. Camilla feels sidelined, one source told the Daily Mirror. This isn't just a ceremonial tweak, it's a redrawing of the royal map, and she's not the one holding the pen. Across the country, the public narrative was far more forgiving. Tabloids hailed Catherine as the heart of the Highlands, while international outlets compared the move to a new royal renaissance. Her photographs, calm, radiant, wrapped in tartan, flooded newsstands. A poll conducted that week showed 84% of Scots believed Catherine's appointment strengthened their connection to the monarchy. Even skeptical voices in the independence movement were momentarily subdued. She's not like the others, admitted one activist from Aberdeen. She listens. And yet, for those within the monarchy's inner circle, that very connection made her dangerous. A senior court historian described it as the Diana effect reborn. He elaborated, "Whenever a royal becomes too beloved, too human, the institution trembles. Catherine's grace draws affection, and affection draws power." King Charles, according to aides, anticipated resistance. His decision was calculated, not impulsive. He believed the monarchy needed regional anchors, figures who could embody its values in every corner of the kingdom. Scotland, with its proud independence and emotional distance from Westminster, was the first step. Wales or Northern Ireland might follow. But few expected him to move so soon, or to elevate Catherine in such a singular way. One senior advisor confided that Charles saw the act as restorative. After years of public fatigue and cynicism, he wanted to create a story that inspired belief. His Majesty remembers the loss of trust after Diana's death, the aide said softly. He doesn't want that legacy to define the next generation. Still, the family dynamic is shifting in ways no one can fully predict. For Prince William, the move is both blessing and burden. Publicly, he appeared proud, even protective, as he stood beside Catherine during the announcement. But according to those close to him, he was uneasy about the scale of attention now directed toward his wife. He knows how fast adoration can turn to obsession, said a former Kensington Palace staffer. He lived through it with his mother. Even in Scotland, the glow of celebration carried a flicker of apprehension. Commentators began asking practical questions. What powers, if any, would Catherine hold? Would this set a precedent for future regional monarchs? And perhaps most crucially, what would it mean for the unity of the crown? Dr. Fiona McLaren, a political sociologist at the University of Glasgow, captured the sentiment perfectly. It's a beautiful gesture wrapped in political dynamite. You can't give someone the title of monarch without changing the way people see the real one. Meanwhile, Catherine continued with quiet precision. The day after the ceremony, she visited a children's hospice in Edinburgh, dressed simply in grey wool, greeting each family by name. Reporters noted she carried no entourage, no fanfare, just composure. The footage, broadcast on every major network that evening, drew tears across social media. This is what monarchy should look like, one viewer posted. Dignity without distance. But not everyone was weeping with joy. Inside Clarence House, advisors were already discussing communication recalibration. Translation: damage control. One veteran aide admitted that Catherine's popularity is starting to eclipse the king's. Another warned bluntly, you can't crown two hearts at once. And so, beneath the glowing headlines and royal smiles, the great paradox of the crown was back in motion. The people's admiration, the very thing Charles hoped would unite the nation, was now threatening to divide his own house. As one palace insider put it late that night, Charles gave Scotland a monarch. What he didn't expect was that the world would start treating her like the monarch. And somewhere, in the quiet halls of Balmoral, the king himself is said to have whispered to a trusted aide, "If love for her strengthens the crown, then let it be so. But if it tests it, we must be ready. Because every crown, however symbolic, casts a shadow. And in this new era of the monarchy, that shadow is beginning to move." By the end of the week, that shadow had lengthened across every front page in Britain. The story that began as a proud Scottish gesture had evolved into a full-blown constitutional drama, and one woman, poised and unshaken, stood at the centre of it all. Catherine, now officially styled Her Royal Highness, the Monarch of Scotland, had become both symbol and sensation. In Edinburgh, her portrait hung beside the Saltire flag outside civic buildings. In Glasgow, shopkeepers sold mugs bearing her image under the headline, "Our Highland Queen." In London, the tone was more cautious. "A delicate balance of unity and division," read the Times. Yet even the critics admitted the numbers didn't lie. Approval ratings for the monarchy in Scotland had soared to their highest point in decades. What captured hearts wasn't the title, it was the way Catherine carried it. Her first week in the role saw her move through Scotland with almost surgical precision, visiting local charities, Gaelic schools, rural farmers, and coastal conservation groups. Cameras caught her kneeling in muddy boots, laughing with schoolchildren, or quietly listening to grieving families. "She doesn't perform," said one observer. "She feels." In Aberdeen, a crowd of nearly 10,000 gathered just to see her wave. In that sea of tartan scarves, banners read "Kate of the North" and "A Monarch for the People." One elderly woman, clutching a framed photograph of Queen Elizabeth II, said softly to a reporter, "The Queen was our dignity. Catherine is our heart." Inside the royal apparatus, however, the admiration was starting to sting. Senior officials struggled to keep up with the media frenzy. One royal insider described the growing unease. "Every time she smiles, it's another headline. Every handshake becomes a statement." The palace PR team can't control the narrative anymore. She's writing it herself. The king, meanwhile, tried to maintain calm. From Balmoral, he issued a statement praising Scotland's unwavering spirit and reaffirming his confidence in Catherine's leadership. Yet sources close to him revealed an undercurrent of strain. "He loves her like a daughter," one aide said. But even he didn't expect her to dominate the world's attention this quickly. In crass. And then came the whisper, one that changed the tone completely. A leaked memo, reportedly circulated among senior royal staff, hinted at a possible review of ceremonial jurisdictions. The meaning was vague, but the implication clear. London was uneasy about the extent of Catherine's new prominence. The leak triggered a wave of speculation. Had the king been pressured to limit her duties? Was there a quiet attempt to draw boundaries before admiration turned to rivalry? Royal watchers were quick to notice that, for the first time, Catherine's next engagement in Stirling was postponed for logistical reasons. It didn't escape anyone's notice that the delay coincided with a private meeting at Clarence House. Camilla, according to royal correspondence, had requested clarity on Catherine's title and role. "The Queen Consort doesn't want confusion," one palace source explained. "She supports Catherine, of course, but protocol matters." Behind the polite phrasing, it was clear something deeper was brewing. In television studios and newspaper panels, experts debated whether this was unity or quiet rebellion. "It's not just symbolism anymore," argued constitutional analyst Dr. Lennox. "We're witnessing the monarchy being redrawn, live, in real time." Amid the speculation, Catherine maintained her composure. She returned to London briefly to join Prince William for a mental health summit. Cameras captured the two exchanging a brief look, half pride, half worry, as they stepped out of their car into the flashbulbs. Insiders described William as supportive but protective, aware that his wife's meteoric rise could just as easily provoke envy as admiration. Public opinion, however, was clear. Viewers flooded broadcast networks with messages of support. One BBC commentator called it the greatest surge of public affection since Diana. Another, more pointedly, wrote, "The difference is, this time, the crown sees it coming." But if Charles had foreseen the emotional wave, he hadn't anticipated how quickly it might erode the old order. A senior royal historian observed, "He wanted Catherine to unify the realm, but in doing so, he's created a second centre of gravity. The monarchy has never been good at sharing light." As Catherine prepared to return to Scotland for her next official visit, new chants echoed across the streets of Edinburgh. "Our Monarch of Hearts." Commentators called it poetic, courtiers called it alarming. Evening newscasts carried the same question across every channel. Was this a triumph of modern monarchy, or the beginning of a quiet succession none dared to name? Because in a family where every title carries centuries of weight, even a symbolic crown can shift the balance of power. And deep inside the palace, where portraits of past sovereigns line the halls, one couldn't help but imagine the faint sound of history turning, again, in Catherine's direction. By the following month, the story had evolved from ceremony to strategy. What began as a touching gesture of unity had become the defining test of King Charles's reign and of Catherine's resolve. Edinburgh's parliament still buzzed with pride, but in London, polite admiration had given way to whispered calculation. Royal aides began referring to it discreetly as the Scottish question. No one dared call it a crisis, but the pattern was familiar. Popularity breeds tension, and tension breeds distance. Catherine's every movement was watched, every silence analysed. When she skipped a reception at Windsor citing schedule conflicts, commentators filled the gap with theory. She's asserting independence, one columnist claimed. Another, in The Times, called it the moment the crown learned to blink. Inside the royal circle, battle lines were forming, quietly, carefully. Clarence House officials, loyal to the King and Queen consort, pushed for measured visibility. Kensington Palace, managing William and Catherine's household, preferred authenticity over restraint. They want her to be herself, said one insider, because that's what works, but it's also what scares everyone else. For Catherine, the balancing act was brutal. Her title demanded presence in Scotland, yet her marriage and duties bound her to London. William reportedly advised her to move gently, wary of igniting comparisons to his mother. "He's proud of her," said a friend of the couple, but he remembers how fast adoration can become danger. And yet, in Scotland, Catherine's appeal only deepened. Her second tour through the Highlands drew crowds that dwarfed any royal event since Elizabeth II. Villagers lined muddy roads for hours just to catch a glimpse. She visited rural clinics, toured a whiskey distillery, and spoke at a youth forum about resilience. All simple gestures that landed like history. "It's not that she acts royal," said a teacher from Inverness. "It's that she acts real." Local newspapers described her as the beating heart of the North. One Gaelic poet even composed a verse titled "Crown of the Kind One," which went viral on Scottish social media. The sentiment was clear. Catherine wasn't just representing Scotland, she was embodying it. But not everyone saw poetry in her rise. According to sources close to Buckingham Palace, Queen Camilla had grown increasingly frustrated with how the press framed Catherine's new role. Every headline about Scotland mentions her name. A friend of the Queen was quoted saying, "It's as though no one else exists." Royal watchers began to speak of an unspoken rivalry, one not of malice, but of visibility. "Camilla represents continuity," explained royal analyst Miriam Frost. "Catherine represents the future, and futures, by nature, make people nervous." The king, ever the pragmatist, tried to quell the noise. He summoned senior aides to Balmoral for what one source described as a weekend of reflection. There, over roaring fires and long walks through the moors, he reportedly wrestled with how to steer the monarchy through its own modernization. "He wanted to unify," said one confidant. "Instead, he may have built two monarchies, one traditional, one emotional." That contrast became painfully clear when Catherine, returning to Edinburgh for a mental health conference, was greeted by thousands chanting her name, not as "Your Royal Highness," but as "Our Queen." The chant spread like a current through the crowd, filling the courtyard of Holyrood House. Cameras captured her reaction, a brief startled smile followed by a deep bow of the head. It was a moment of grace and of quiet alarm. Hours later, inside palace walls, aides scrambled to manage the headlines. "Our Queen?" blared one tabloid. "The North crowns its own." Within hours, hashtags like "Number Queen Catherine" trended across social media. The optics were impossible to ignore. "Symbolic or not," said constitutional expert Dr. Lennox, "titles carry power, and power always finds its way to the surface." Behind closed doors, Charles reportedly stayed calm but distant. He spoke to Catherine privately, encouraging her to stay the course. A source familiar with the conversation said it was warm but firm, a reminder of boundaries dressed as affection. Catherine, true to form, thanked him publicly days later, praising his guidance and vision. But even that line sparked analysis. Was it gratitude or subtle reassurance that she still knew her place? Through it all, Catherine remained composed, her schedule unchanged. She attended a Gaelic arts festival, donated anonymously to a rural childcare charity, and hosted her first official reception at Holyrood. Her speech that evening, delivered to a room heavy with history, carried quiet power. Scotland's crown is not gold but trust, and that trust must be earned every day. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Commentators called it one of the most moving royal addresses in recent memory. But back in London, another reaction took hold: silence. Because beneath the applause and admiration, the question was no longer whether Catherine could handle the crown of Scotland. It was whether the rest of the royal family could handle her holding it. And as one palace insider murmured to the Daily Mail that night, "You can share a family. You can share a nation, but you cannot share a crown." The wind was shifting again, and this time it was blowing from the north. And as the winds of change sweep through both palaces and highlands, one truth remains: the crown may rest on one head, but its weight is felt by all. Thank you for watching and stay tuned, because this story is far from over.